Hey, how's it going? This is going to be a quick beginner's guide to Berserker on the Dark Age of Camelot Eden private server. There will be 6 sections to this video: playstyle and role, specs for leveling and RVR, realm abilities, temp and important stats, recorder, and then just some quick tips. This is a beginner guide for folks who are just coming back to the game or want a refresher on how to play, and is geared on getting you kick-started into RVR. It's also mostly focused on solo duo gameplay, as that is what I have the most experience with. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to ask in the comments or head over to the Eden Discord and ask in the class channels. Just make sure to check the pinned messages or use the search function first to make sure you're not asking some common repeat questions. Playstyle and role. Berserker is a light tank melee DPS with one of the highest consistent burst DPSs in the game. It wears studded armor and has access to a lot of strong realm abilities. Reflex attack, charge, and determination are the hallmarks of the class, along with its main ability, Vendo, which makes every hit crit. With access to so many CC reduction skills and the 25% innate CC reduction Stoicism provides, they are hard to hold down, and combined with reflex attack, they shred through defenses of many classes. They're one of the best classes for taking out any dual wielders and especially stealthers. They also get access to wall climbing, giving them something to do in Zergs. This makes it a top tier choice for all types of gameplay, making them highly sought after from solo to 8-mans and everything in between. Let's talk specs. We should start with what race and starting stats you should choose. I always like to preface this with the fact that these differences are pretty minimal and most players won't notice the difference. If you like how one race looks over another, just play that. If you weren't aware, you can adjust your starting stats here. If you want the max damage, Troll is going to be your best bet, as they have the highest strength. Their downside is that they are large targets and have lower quickness. For starting stats, I'd put 10 strength and 15 quickness. Norseman is also a fine choice, and the one that I went with. They're fairly evenly distributed stat-wise and have a smaller hitbox. I'd go 15 strength and 10 quickness. Dwarf works as well. They're a bit tankier than Norsemen's and are also fairly evenly distributed stat-wise. They've got some good resist bonuses and are tiny, so hard to click as well. Plus, eye patch and beard is always great. I'd also go 15 strength and 10 quickness for dwarf starting stats. Valken is probably the least common pick. They have a much higher base quickness and some more dex, but a much lower constitution. I'd go 15 strength and 10 constitution for your starting stats. Let's talk leveling specs. Zerg specs are very simple, as they are pure melees. When leveling, I'd suggest just speccing left axe at level and weapon after that. Most Zergs go either sword or axe for their main hand, with sword probably taking the spot for most common. If you have any points left over, you can throw them into parry. The level 50 spec is pretty straightforward as well. I'd suggest 51 comp weapon spec for sword or axe, 50 left axe, and rest in parry. The decision between axe and sword doesn't really come down to much, honestly. Sword has FSLS, or Fine Steel Longsword, which has good procs. Axe, meanwhile, has both a side and back snare, as well as an anytime 2-part attack speed reduction chain. Honestly, both will do just fine. Select whichever you think is cooler. Most end up on sword for FSLS, but axe is just fine. Most don't go hammer, as FSLS and Dragonmight are just too strong. Champion levels are another important part of your level 50 spec. As usual, I'd suggest going down the CL resist seer line first, as it really makes you much tankier. After that, I'd probably go down the casted debuff snare nuke line or grab the casted disease. It should help you out with interrupting at range and reducing your enemy's ability to cut you. Let's talk realm abilities. Zergs have access to a ton of awesome realm abilities that make them incredibly strong at high rank. However, how you can spec changes a decent amount depending on what kind of gameplay you're going to be doing. That being said, Longwind 1 is practically mandatory for all specs, as in combination with a level 30 endurance potion, you get access to perma sprint. I'll start with a solo spec. To start, you're going to want to go with the classic Purge 2. Purge allows you to get out of any debilitating effects immediately, like debuffs, poisons, and most importantly, CCs. After that, I'd suggest investing in Charge, all the way up to at least Charge 3 to start. Charge gives you a 15-second immunity to all CCs, as well as a 174% speed boost, letting you catch up to most targets and secure kills when you would otherwise be stopped with CC. The last active ability I'd suggest getting is Ignore Pain. This is just a large heal that completely ignores disease. It lets the relatively squishy class survive in 1vx situations. This is one of the abilities I'd suggest getting once you're a little bit higher rank, as 1, you can get some healing through potions and heal over time charges, and 2, I'd much rather have the ability to kill others first and then work towards being able to survive multiple people, rather than have a smaller heal at lower ranks. The next realm ability to talk about is Reflex Attack. Reflex Attack can be an incredibly powerful ability. It gives you percentage chance to hit back whenever an opponent hits you. This includes when you parry or are stunned. It is what allows you to do insane damage against all dual wielders and shred through stealthers. It also means that you will get your weapon procs much more often. I'd say to not invest in it until you can get at least 2 levels of it, with Reflex Attack 3 being a solid breakpoint to stop at until higher rank. After all that, I'd suggest boosting your defenses some with Mastery of Parry, which gives a percentage increase to your parry chance. It's also useful to put more points into Mastery of Pain to increase your crit chance. While Vendo does make you crit every time, it has a cooldown, and increasing Mastery of Pain increases the base damage percentage your crit will do while in Vendo. If you have any points in between getting those abilities, you can always throw some points into stat increase RAs like Aug Quick or Strength. Keep in mind that quickness does cap out at 250. A realm rank 5L1 solo spec might look something like this: Longwind 1, Purge 2, Charge 3, reflex attack 3. This is the spec that would give you a fairly consistent and often chance to kill an opponent one-on-one with a 5-minute cooldown on charge. If instead you would rather wait longer and be stronger in shorter bursts, you could knock charge down to charge 1 and pick up IP2. This would mean you'd have a pretty good shot at 1vx once every 15 minutes. That would look something more like this: Long Wind 1, Purge 2, Charge 1, Reflex Attack 3, Ignore Pain 2. If you are more group or Zerg focused, then I would go much more into Determination and Charge, and you can forego Reflex Attack and IP as they're not nearly as useful. Determination is a realm ability that makes all CC affect you less on a percentage basis, with Det 9 giving you a 55% reduction to all spell-based CC. A realm rank 5L1 group spec might look something more like this: Long Wind 1, Det 9, Charge 3, and then some passive RAs like Mastery of Pain 2 and Mastery of Parry 1. Let's talk about temps and important stats. Zerks are not all that hard to temp, however there are a few things to keep in mind and spots that can be optimized with good ROGs. As always, there are plenty of ROG-less temps ready to build in Zencraft and the Discord class channels. Recently, Proud Ginger took a shot at making a solid temp that anyone can build and has a good swap to double legendaries. Let's start with the most important stats and TOA bonuses. Stat-wise, strength is your most important stat as it is your damage modifier. You will also want as much quickness as you can fit, keeping in mind that the stat caps out at 250. After that, constitution is always good. Dex is probably the least important, as it only gives you about a 1% increase to evade and parry chance per 50 points. TOA bonus wise, obviously all the melee bonuses should be maxed out. Melee damage and speed are mandatory, and style damage as well. Healing bonus and armor factor are also very good to have. If you can fit it in, duration can be helpful as well, as it will extend your realm rank 5 timer longer. Let's talk about some of the good items that you should consider. Armor-wise, there are a good few options. I'd start with the Astral Chest and Legs. These are great items for solo play, but are a little bit less useful for groups. The chest has a solid hot proc, which is always good for solo, and the legs have a cool proc, which debuffs your enemy's stats for a large amount and gives them to you. It makes you hit harder and much tankier, and makes your enemies weaker. The Remnant Cloak has a hot charge as well, which is good to have if you can fit it in. The champion level weapon also has a hot if you can't, and can be kept in the 2-hand slot. Keep in mind to not swap it out, as it will reset the cooldown timer. The Dragon Slayer armor is good as well if you're aiming to have some more double proc armor pieces. Most people go with the same plan for the weapons. Especially when soloing, you should be aiming for celerity proc into a cold legendary weapon swap. Luckily, this isn't too hard to do, as there's both an axe and sword option that procs celerity. Fine Steel Longsword is the option that pretty much any sword wielder will pick up, as it has a strong celerity proc as well as an offensive attack speed reduction proc. The axe option is Dragonmight, which has celerity and an Omni Drain. The holy grail of a setup would be to have either main hand FSLS with Dragonmight offhand or double Dragonmights. This will make it so you proc celerity incredibly fast and are able to swap over to your cold legendaries as soon as possible. You want cold legendaries, as they will debuff for your sidechain DD Aurora Borealis, which does cold damage. When you manage to have celerity, cold legendaries, and Vendo up while hitting that sidechain, the damage you can put out is pretty ridiculous. There are a couple of other weapons to keep in mind. Moment of Zen has an armor absorption buff and endurance drain, and Zimmerman's Wrath is another option with an armor absorption buff. Both of these weapons used to be best in slot last season before legendaries were added. I'd say that the double celerity into legendaries is still better, but if you can get the Zim drop on Cathel or can't afford a good legendary, these are solid alternatives. Let's talk about recorders. I've got a few different recorders set up for my Berserker. I start with a parry chain in anytime, an evade chain in anytime, a side chain in anytime, and my snare styles. I also have a CL buff button that's combined with my realm rank 5, a heal button with my potions hot and ignore pain. One of the better Zerks on the server also suggests having a recorder with Vendo, realm rank 5, hot and CL resists, and armor buff on it, as it's a 1vx time button. Let's just go through a few quick tips. Vendo is the key ability for Berserkers, and it's important to understand. It makes it so that you crit on every single hit, but comes with the downside that you no longer dodge or parry any attacks. You should try to use this only when your opponent is stunned and cannot hit you, otherwise you are very squishy. The crit damage starts with a variance of 10 to 99% bonus damage, 10 being the base crit chance for all melees. With each increase to that base crit chance using the realm ability Mastery of Pain, that minimum crit damage while in Vendo also increases. Your arm rank 5 ability is also incredibly important to maximizing your 1vx capabilities. It's called Ferocious Will and gives a 25% absorption buff, a 25% resistance bonus, and a 25% chance to shrug off crowd control spells for 30 seconds, with a 10-minute cooldown. This can help cover up the downsides that come with Vendo and make you much more tanky when fighting off multiple opponents. It's important to remember that you can use throwing weapons. You can craft them or buy them from this merchant in Jordheim. They are great for pulling mobs while leveling and for interrupts when fighting against kiting or caster classes that go in your range slot. Use the keybind for swapping to range twice to load and throw the weapon. It's a good idea to add some active charges to some of your crafted items, like your boots, hands, helm, or even on the throwing weapons. These armor pieces have a fairly low proc rate, and procs can be sacrificed for a more useful charge, while the throwing weapons are incredibly cheap. I'd suggest putting a DD charge on the throwing weapon and considering adding a disease cure charge to one of your armor pieces. This will help you contend with the classes that can kite you or are hitting you from range. The disease cure can also be swapped in if you do not want to sacrifice the proc chance. Alright, I think that's all I got for you, so if it helped, a like would be cool, and I also plan on releasing guides for the other classes that I've played, so if you want to see those, subscribe. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you out on the frontiers.